If you're watching this story already knows something about you. Not your name, not your face, your decision. And before this ends, you'll realize you already made it. Before the story starts, subscribe now, because once this begins, you won't want to leave halfway through. There was a rule he learned early. It was simple, absolute, and non-negotiable. If the lights went out, you waited. You didn't move. You didn't speak. And under no circumstances did you ever look around. You just froze, held your breath, and waited for the light to return. At first, it only happened once in a while. A flicker, then darkness, lasting just long enough to feel uncomfortable. A few seconds of pure, unbroken black. When the lights came back on, everything would be exactly as it was. Nothing moved. Nothing changed. It was easy to dismiss. Faulty wiring, a neighborhood power surge, anything plausible. But then it started lasting longer. The short, sharp shocks of darkness stretched into minutes. The silence that came with it wasn't empty anymore. It felt occupied. It was a heavy, pressing silence that made the air feel thick in your lungs. It felt like something was standing very close, just outside your field of vision, waiting. Waiting for you to make a mistake. Waiting for you to break the rule. The feeling was undeniable. A presence in the room that wasn't there when the lights were on. It was a cold spot that seemed to drift. A subtle pressure against the skin, like the air itself was congealing around you. He would sit there, muscles locked, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, his mind screaming one thing over and over. Don't look, don't move, don't make a sound. Wait for the light. And every time, after what felt like an eternity, the lights would snap back on and the feeling would vanish instantly. The room would be empty again. Normal again. But the memory of that presence, Matt stayed. He tried to rationalize it. It had to be stress, long hours at work, not enough sleep. An overactive imagination fueled by too many late-night horror stories. He told himself it was just a strange quirk of his old apartment building's electrical system. Power issues. That's all it was. But the pattern was too consistent to ignore. It was always the same. First, the lights would go out without a sound. No pop, no fizz, just an instant plunge into total blackness. Then came the silence. A silence so profound it felt like it was swallowing every other noise in the world. And then came the pressure. A palpable weight in the room, a feeling of being watched by something he couldn't see. And after each incident, when the lights finally returned, there was a new feeling, a subtle but persistent sense that the room was smaller than before. The walls felt closer, the ceiling lower. It was as if the darkness was physically compressing his space, stealing a tiny fraction of it each time it came. He tried testing it. He'd leave objects in specific places, only to find them untouched when the lights came back. He tried recording the audio, but the files were always just dead air, a perfect, unnerving silence. Everything pointed to it being in his head. And yet the feeling grew stronger each time. The presence felt more confident, more patient. One night, he broke the rule. The darkness had held for nearly 5 minutes, the longest it had ever been. The pressure was immense, the feeling of being watched suffocating. He couldn't take it anymore. It was just a glance, a quick, defiant flick of his eyes to the left. He saw nothing, just the familiar shape of his armchair, a vague silhouette against the deeper black. But the silence changed. It wasn't just a lack of sound anymore. It felt disappointed. The pressure in the room didn't increase. It receded, but with a new quality, a sullen, resentful energy that was almost worse than the watchful stillness. The lights returned a moment later, but the feeling of a smaller room was more pronounced than ever. He had looked, and something had noticed. That's when the signs started appearing. They weren't written down. They weren't spoken aloud. They were felt. It was like the story itself. The very fabric of his reality was reacting to his choices. After he broke the rule, the darkness began to stay longer. The 5-minute intervals became 10, then 20. The feeling of disappointment was replaced by a sense of anticipation, an eager stillness that promised something worse was coming if he looked again. But when he followed the rule, when he endured the long, terrifying minutes without moving a muscle, the darkness would pull back. The next time it happened, the duration would be shorter. The pressure would be less intense. It was almost as if it was teaching him something, or training him. A system of reward and punishment. Obedience was met with a brief reprieve. Defiance was punished with prolonged exposure to that thing. He started to see it as a negotiation. A silent, terrifying bargain with an entity he couldn't see or comprehend. Stay still, the darkness seemed to say, and I will let you go. But look, move, or speak, and I will stay. I will get closer. The rules were becoming clearer. This wasn't a random event. This was a process. He was a participant, whether he wanted to be or not. And the goal of the other participants seemed to be to test his limits, to see how long he could obey before his curiosity or his fear made him break. He was being conditioned like a lab animal in a cruel experiment, and the prize for good behavior was simply a return to normalcy, a prize that was becoming more and more precious with each passing blackout. He finally understood the truth, and it was far stranger and more terrifying than faulty wiring or a stressed-out mind. This wasn't about the lights. The lights going out was just the trigger, the condition that made it possible. This was about attention. Whatever was there in the dark, it fed on attention. It only existed when it was noticed. The act of looking for it, of listening for it, of even thinking about it too hard, that's what gave it substance. That's what made the silence feel occupied and the air feel heavy. When he ignored it, when he truly forced his mind away and focused only on the command to remain still, it faded. Slowly, reluctantly, like a starved creature retreating into the shadows. His defiance that one night, the quick glance into the darkness, hadn't just broken a rule, it had been an invitation. By looking for it, he had acknowledged it. He had confirmed its existence. And in doing so, he had given it power. The longer darkness, the increased pressure, that was the consequence. It was a reward for the entity. He had fed it his fear and his attention, and it had grown stronger. The training wasn't to make him obey. It was to teach him how to starve it. The only way to win was not to play. The only way to be safe was to pretend nothing was there at all, even when every instinct screamed that something was standing right behind him. The lights were just a stage. The real battle was in his own mind. If you're still watching right now, subscribe. Because you already understand more than most people who didn't make it this far. That's when he realized the final rule. The most important one, the story wasn't warning him. The darkness, the pressure, the rules, it wasn't a test he was supposed to pass to make it go away. It was preparing him, it was an acclimation period. A tutorial, because the lights didn't matter anymore. That was just the beginner level. The entity had been fed enough attention, not just by him, but by anyone who had ever heard a similar story, anyone who had ever felt a similar fear in the dark. It had grown. It had evolved, and it could exist even when everything was visible. It no longer needed the cover of darkness. It just needed one thing. It needed someone to be paying attention to it. And right now, you are. By listening to this story, by focusing on this idea, you've opened the door, you've set the stage. You are giving it your attention. This is the part where most stories end. The credits roll, the lights come up, and you go back to your life. But this one doesn't because you've been part of it from the beginning. Now you know the rule. And now the story is yours. So if something feels close after this video ends, if the air in your room suddenly feels a little colder, a little heavier, if you get that unshakable feeling that you're being watched, don't look, don't react. And most importantly, don't give it your attention, just pretend it isn't there. Because your attention is what it wants. Your attention is what makes it real. Did you feel that pause just now? Like this video or leave a comment so I know you're still here. And remember, this only works when the lights go out.